Okay, guys, if you look on YouTube, you will find a video on the functions of insulin. You will find a video on the functions of glucagon. And now I'm going to finish up the rest of the hormones. The hormone that I'm going to talk about first is epinephrine. Epinephrine is the hormone that is linked with the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system will directly stimulate the adrenal medulla. So here's a kidney, and sitting on top of it is your adrenal gland. If you look at the word, epi, above or outside, nepher, kidney, in, hormone. Epi, nepher, in. That's where you can figure out where the adrenal gland is. The adrenal gland has two parts. It has a outer part called the adrenal cortex, and has a crunchy inner part called the medulla, or medulla. I ain't never going to change. It's medulla. And that's where the hormone epinephrine is released from. Now, you have the sympathetic nervous system, and it has nerves that directly innervate the adrenal medulla. And when the sympathetic nervous system is stimulated, it's going to cause the release of epinephrine into the blood. Now, this is important. The effects of the sympathetic nervous system and the nervous system in general. The nervous system controls the minute-to-minute, second-to-second changes that occur in your body in an attempt to maintain homeostasis. So it acts quickly, but its effects go away quickly. Epinephrine is the hormone of the sympathetic nervous system. It takes longer to act, but it acts longer. And basically what it does is it amplifies the effects of the sympathetic nervous system. It makes those effects stronger, and they last longer. Sounds like a commercial. Anyways, epinephrine, in order to exert its effect on the cells of the body, you're not going to believe this, epinephrine has to bind to receptors embedded in the cell membrane. And those receptors have a special name. They're called beta receptors. Beta receptors bind epinephrine. And again, what's the function of epinephrine generally? That is to prepare your body to run or fight. That's why I wanted you in quiz number 1 to explain to me the positive feedback mechanism of the sympathetic nervous system, because it's going to take us into the effects of epinephrine on the sympathetic nervous system, on metabolism. So watch. Again, if you have disease, you are sick. So that means you have dis-ease. And when your body is not at ease, your body is stressed. And that stress of the body is going to stimulate the sympathetic nervous system. Okay. How do you know you're stressed? Well, your brain perceives stress. So when we talk about epinephrine's effect on metabolism, right? here we go. And one of the best examples I can give you, and this kind of ties into the signs and symptoms of hypoglycemia, because the signs and symptoms of hypoglycemia are produced by the sympathetic nervous system and epinephrine. So watch. If you are a type 1 diabetic, right, and you are either sick, right, and when you're sick, that is disease, and that is going to increase the activation of the sympathetic nervous system. And because your sympathetic nervous system is activated, the sympathetic nervous system is going to cause the release of epinephrine from the adrenal medulla. So you're going to have increased epi circulating in your blood. All right? Write this down, never forget it. You have beta-1 receptors that bind epinephrine in your heart. All you have to do is think about when you are scared. So what does epinephrine do to your heart rate and the force of contraction of your heart when you're scared? Well, your heart rate goes up. The force of contraction, how hard the heart contracts, goes up, so it feels like your heart's pounding out of your chest. And when the force of contraction goes up, that's going to increase your blood pressure, right? You have beta-2 receptors in your bronchioles, the smaller airways that contain muscle. I can't spell that. So when epinephrine binds to beta-2 receptors in the bronchioles, it's going to cause the bronchioles to dilate. And that makes perfect sense, because when you're scared, what do you want to do? You're going to prepare your body to run or fight. And when you're running or fighting, you're going to have to get more oxygen in and more CO2 out. So you need the airways to open up. That's why albuterol inhalers stimulate beta-2 receptors in the bronchioles and will cause the bronchioles to dilate. That's why the side effects of albuterol is heart rate, shaky, sweaty, anxious, because it mimics epinephrine. You also have beta-1 receptors in sweat glands. And when they're stimulated, that's going to increase sweat production. Diaphoresis, right? So when you're scared, you sweat. Now, you also have beta-1 receptor in skeletal muscle. And when you are scared, right, that's going to stimulate muscles, and your muscles will begin to contract, right, in anticipation of running or fighting for your life. So you will get shaky. Yeah. Now, what I really want to know is its effect on metabolism. Now look. So you're a type 1 diabetic. You took your insulin, say at night, and you forgot to eat. And let's say that when you took your insulin, your blood sugar was 80. Normally, in a person who's not a diabetic, you shouldn't have insulin circulating. You shouldn't have any insulin, right? But this person's a type 1 diabetic, so they took their insulin, but their blood sugar was only 80, and they forgot to eat. And let's say they go to bed. God bless Timmy, right? What's insulin going to do? Insulin's going to do its job, right? Here's a cell. Insulin's going to circulate in the blood. Even though your blood sugar is 80, it's going to bind to an insulin receptor on the cell. It's going to open up that little gate, and it's going to allow glucose to go from the blood into the cell, effectively dropping your blood sugar. So throughout the night, your blood sugar is going to begin to drop. Now, this is the important piece, right? Normally, when your blood sugar drops below 70, right, the alpha cells of the pancreas, normal physiology, the alpha cells of the pancreas, they release the hormone glucagon. Glucagon is the opposite of insulin. Insulin lowers your blood sugar. Glucagon, the hormone, raises it. But you have insulin circulating in your blood. And the body always does stuff that makes sense. So with insulin in the blood, because you took it because you're a type 1 diabetic, insulin inhibits the release of glucagon. So you don't have a hormone that raises your blood sugar, and you got a hormone that lowers it. So your blood sugar is going to continue to drop. Now, this is the important piece. When your blood sugar drops critically low, right? And it will vary for individual diabetics, depending on how well they control their blood sugar. But we'll just say we're not making this up. It's not written in stone. When your blood sugar drops critically low, right? Let's say it's 30. Critical low blood sugar, because the only fuel the brain can use is glucose. That is going to activate the sympathetic nervous system. Now in this case, because you're a diabetic, you took your sugar was 80, right? You took your insulin and you didn't eat and you went to bed. It's going to lower that blood sugar. Insulin's in the blood, no glucagon to raise it up. So it's going to activate the sympathetic nervous system, and as we just learned, the sympathetic nervous system is going to stimulate the release from the adrenal medulla of epinephrine. Right? So, now, in terms of metabolism, here's a capillary, here's a liver. The liver stores glycogen. Glycogen is individual glucose molecules chemically bonded together. And stored with some water. So and I want you to think about this. Why was the sympathetic nervous system stimulated? Your sympathetic nervous system was stimulated because your blood sugar was critically low. So what do you want the sympathetic nervous system to do along with the hormone epinephrine? You want it to raise your blood sugar. And guess what? That's exactly what it does. So you have epinephrine circulating in the blood along with sympathetic nervous system activation. And again, for epinephrine to exert its effect on a cell, it's got to bind to a specific receptor. In this case, it's called a beta 3 receptor. So when epinephrine binds to beta 3 receptors in the liver, it is going to cause the massive breakdown of glycogen to individual glucose molecules. So that's going to free up glucose in your liver. And now where is glucose highly concentrated? In the liver cells. Where is it lowly concentrated? In the blood. So glucose will diffuse from the liver cell into the blood, raising your blood sugar. And that's exactly what you want. And the only fuel that the brain can use is glucose. The other cells of the body can use fat. So that's the other effect of epinephrine. And again, you have beta 3 receptors on fat cells. So in addition to epinephrine causing the breakdown of glycogen in the liver, it's going to bind to beta 3 receptors on fat cells and cause fat cells to release into the blood triglyceride. And as a result, triglyceride now becomes the most readily available fuel for the other cells of the body to use. And the glucose, what up G, that was dumped into the blood through the breakdown of glycogen will be used for your brain. And that makes perfect sense. So the other thing that epinephrine does, and literally in just about every cell of your body, because you have beta receptors on almost every cell of your body. Right? Here's a cell. Right? Say it's a muscle cell, skeletal muscle. What it's going to do is epinephrine beta 1. When epinephrine binds there, it's going to increase metabolism. So the metabolic pathway is going to speed up. So you'll be burning more glucose or fat, the fuel that's most readily available. So that's why when you get scared sometimes you sweat, and at least initially you start to feel a little warm because of that increased metabolism that will produce heat. So those are the primary effects of epinephrine on metabolism, right? And it makes sense. So with this knowledge of the sympathetic nervous system and epinephrine, we can answer a couple of more questions. For example, what are the signs and symptoms of hypoglycemia? Well, watch. Your blood sugar got critically low, right? Your blood sugar is critically low. Critically low. Yeah, it's critically low. Where is it? Anyways, it got critically low. And when your blood sugar is critically low, right, say 30, that's going to activate the sympathetic nervous system. And the sympathetic nervous system stimulates the adrenal medulla, to release epinephrine. And epinephrine, to exert its effect, has to bind with beta receptors. You have beta 3 in your liver. That's going to cause the massive breakdown of glycogen. You have beta 3 in fat cells, and that's going to increase the amount of triglyceride in the blood, right? But if you recall, you have, where is it? Beta 1 receptors in your heart. So when your blood sugar begins to drop, sympathetic nervous system is stimulated, epinephrine's released. Epinephrine's going to have its effect all over the body, not just on fat cells or the liver. It's going to bind to beta 1 receptors in the heart, and that's going to increase your heart rate and increase the force of contraction of your heart, and that's going to cause your blood pressure to go up. So one of the symptoms of hypoglycemia is tachycardia, fast heart rate. Don't write fast heart rate. You're going to tell me that epinephrine increases your heart rate by binding to beta 1 receptors. And it's going to feel like your heart's pounding out of the chest. So you're going to have like this, you know, rapid, like a, I don't know, thudding heart, you know, feels like it's going to pound out of your chest. And again, that's the effects of epinephrine. Epinephrine is going to stimulate the production of sweat. So these people, they're fine, they're watching Judge Joe Brown, their blood sugar begins to drop, and all of a sudden they start sweating like crazy, and it will pour off them. And what produces the sweat is, of course, our buddy, our pal, epinephrine. Then you got beta 1 receptors in skeletal muscle. When epinephrine stimulates beta 1 receptors in skeletal muscle, it will cause them to shake, so they'll get shaky. So we have tachycardia, thudding heart rate, feels like your heart's going to pound out of your chest. They're going to be sweating, diaphoretic, and they're going to be shaky. Those are all produced by epinephrine. So watch. What's the only fuel that the brain can use? Glucose. But your blood sugar was down. So if glucose, you don't have enough fuel for the brain is going to start to shut down. So they will develop blurred vision, confusion, slurred speech, almost like they're drunk. And they may be anxious due to the effects of the sympathetic nervous system. But these signs are due to the lack of glucose to the brain. So what produces the signs and symptoms of hypoglycemia? It's the effects of epinephrine and the effects of lack of glucose to the brain. Blurred vision, confusion, slurred speech. Just real quick, when I was working in the emergency room, someone comes in and you don't have any information on their medical history and they're unconscious. The two drugs you give them are Narcan. If they're on an opiate overdose, that will block opiate receptors. Or you give them glucagon because their blood sugar could be low. So guy comes in, no medical history, start an IV on him. Doc says, give him some Narcan, do nothing. Then he says, give him ampaglucagon. I give him a glucagon. The guy's unconscious, and then he comes back to life like Don Gatto, and he's like, I'm hungry. So we fed him, and then he ambulated home. So that is the effect of epinephrine in metabolism and the signs and symptoms of hypoglycemia, which are basically produced by the effects of the sympathetic nervous system and epinephrine. Now, from a clinical standpoint, this is important, right? Again, where do you have beta receptors? You got them all over, but you got them in your heart, bronchioles, sweat glands, skeletal muscle. So let's say this same situation happens and a patient is taking a drug to lower their heart rate and blood pressure. They're on a beta blocker. So these are being blocked by the medication. Now, can you sleep when you're scared? No. But if you're taking a beta blocker, beta blockers basically block the effects of the sympathetic nervous system and epinephrine. So say the same thing happens. Type 1 diabetic, right? And you take your insulin and you forget to eat. Your blood sugar is going to go down. When you got insulin in your blood, that prevents the release of glucagon to help you raise it up. So your blood sugar is going to, excuse me, continually drop, and it's going to become critically low. When it becomes critically low, you're going to activate the sympathetic nervous system and stimulate the release of epinephrine. But you're on a beta blocker. So beta blockers block beta receptors. So you will be blocking the effects of epinephrine. So if this person was sleeping, when you're scared, you wake up due to the effects of the sympathetic nervous system and epinephrine. But if you're on a beta blocker, you're blocking the effects of the sympathetic nervous system and epinephrine. So these people wake up dead. That's why beta blockers are used judiciously in type 1 diabetics. Because also, right, where do you have beta receptors? Heart, bronchial, sweat glands, skeletal muscle. And you have beta 3 receptors on your liver and fat cells. So if you're on a beta blocker and you're blocking these beta receptors, you will not have a way, when your blood sugar gets critically low, to raise your blood sugar. And those people will wake up dead. So when you get into clinical, they're going to talk about beta blockers masking the signs and symptoms of hypoglycemia. But if you know how the signs and symptoms are produced and what epinephrine does, that makes it perfectly clear. And that is, of course, beautiful and true learning. Oh, yeah. So I answered a couple of questions there. I answered the signs and symptoms of hypoglycemia. I also explained to you the effects of epinephrine on metabolism. Now, for the effects of epinephrine on metabolism, I really want three things. I want the breakdown of glycogen, epinephrine binding to beta-3 receptors, the breakdown of fat to increase the triglyceride level so the other cells can use the fat and you save the glucose for the brain, and the fact that epinephrine increases the metabolic rate in most cells of the body, and that's what produces a little heat. That's why drugs that mimic epinephrine are good at weight loss, because when you're scared, you don't eat, excuse me, and epinephrine increases your metabolic rate. So you burn more calories and you take in less calories. So pseudoephedrine, right, ephedrine, those drugs mimic epinephrine. Let's see. Anything else? I think that's it. All right, so I hope that helped. And that's what I'm looking for.